So you can do it as you wish. Now, girls, last week I gave you out the sikha. Do you have it? If you don't, I have some more copies. Or maybe I didn't give it to you all together. Here. The new one. Take this. There's plenty. Here, there's plenty more. This is our last sikha on Amalek. In other words, this is our last week. Next week, IYH and BLNDR and a bunch of other prayers and wishes and hopes. We're going to do Mizmah Shechanuk. We'll go back to Siddur. We'll spend a little time on Siddur. We did a lot on Amalek. We did a lot. We learned the Parsha inside, the Chumash. We learned the Maimer on Amalek. And we learned, I think this is our fourth sikha. Good morning. This is our fourth sikha on Amalek. What is your name?
Esther McConnell.
When you're not next to your sister, I don't recognize you.
Oh, my sister, like, no, you going so.
Yeah. Okay. We did a maimed, we did several sikhs, and I did something which I've never done before. I learned sikhs from Pashas Kitetse in Dvarim, in Deuteronomy. Because what we're doing is we're going through the narrative of the Chumash. We're learning the story of the Chumash. But the way we're learning the story of the Chumash is we're learning, it's based on sikhs, predominantly, we're learning sikhs on the various top stories and topics that come up in the Torah. So the story we're doing now is Amalek, right? That in a very short window, somewhere between the 15th of the month of Iyar and the 1st of the month of Sivan, Amalek attacked the Jewish people. They started a war. The war was over, and we defeated them by destroying their greatest warriors and their leaders. And of course, the Torah says that you have to remember, right? That Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, "V'sim ba'ozne Yeshua," make sure you pass it along to Yeshua. And then, of course, in Deuteronomy, in Dvarim, in the end of Pashas Kitetse, you have Zocher Asher Sacha Amalek, and then it says Timcha Zecher Amalek. There's a mitzvah upon the Jewish people to erase Amalek. So what we did was, I explained to you Amalek Api Chasidus, right? And there's two basic things that Amalek are. Number one is Asher Korcha, Amalek takes away your passion. And number two, Amalek is Begematria Safik. It tries to create doubt. In other words, Amalek is not an enemy with an agenda. Amalek is an enemy with an agenda, but the agenda is that we exist. It's not Amalek opposes us because they disagree with a certain philosophy, with a certain attitude, with a certain principle, with a certain approach. They just don't like the fact we exist. And that's what the Torah says, Mochet Emche and Timche, you have to erase Amalek. And Amalek's bad, right? Amalek represents the worst evil in the world. There are many, many evils. Amalek is representative of the worst evil. Amalek has to be erased. And of course, the strange thing about the erasing of Amalek is what we learned in the Sikha of last week and the week before, that you have to remember, to forget. Now, what's the point of remembering to forget? Don't remember, don't have anything to forget. So the way that Rebbe told us in last week's Sikha, there's good remembering and there's bad remembering. Good remembering is to remember the idea of Amalek to destroy them, and bad remembering is remembering Amalek to study them. And on this basis, we had a very interesting Rashi, where Rashi said, human beings and animals, there's no way to keep them alive, and they shouldn't remind you where they come from. Buildings, on the other hand, you can modify them, you could change them, and they'll lose their earlier identity, and they'll take on the new identity, and that's why there's no chiyuv to destroy the doimim of Amalek. This was the sikha that we learned 2 weeks ago and last week. The sikha that you have in front of you is from Chelik Yutes, volume 19 in Likutei Sichos, and it's an Amalek sikha. This is our last Amalek sikha. I'm hoping to finish the sikha today, and Belineh the next Wednesday, if I'm ready. I'm going to have to be ready, whether I like it or not. I've been preparing this whole time, and I'm very far from prepared. We're going to be learning Hashem inside Miz Mashiach and Nukas Abayis LeDavid. If you're with us in the Siddur program, in the beginning of this year, we finished Hoidu, and we interrupted with this Pasha of Amalek. Now we're doing, when we finish Amalek, we're going to go back and do Miz Mashiach and Nukas Abayis LeDavid. So what's the deal? What are we doing today? This sikha is interesting. Personally, I think the sikha is very controversial. And I also believe that the controversy of the sikha is veiled. You don't realize that the sikha is controversial. The Rebbe is saying something radical, something different than we assumed about Amalek, but he says it's so fine that you don't even realize the radical statement that the Rebbe is making. Before I came here today, I opened up a bunch of shvat, a bunch of Maimorim. I was looking for something in the Maimorim of the Rebbe which supports this sikha. I could not find it, but I know it's there. I have the good fortune, the incredibly good fortune. I make a living teaching Chassidus. That's what I do. I get paid to teach people Chassidus. And one of the things that I've done over the years is I've taught Maimorim of the Rebbe. I've taught hundreds of Maimorim of the Rebbe over the years, Baruch Hashem. I've taught 11 complete years of the Rebbe's Maimorim. And in one of those Maimorim, or in two of those Maimorim, I came across the same theory that runs through the sikha we're going to learn today, except that in the Maimorim, the radical statement is explicit. What the Rebbe is saying that's unusual is very, very clear. So I want to begin today's class with an introduction. There's a pasuk in Chumash, about his Balak, which I've mentioned many times over the last, I don't know how long we're doing Amalek, but it's for the last 5 or 6 weeks, yeah. And I want to repeat it again now, and then I want to explain to you what the Rebbe says that's inconsistent with that, and then we're going to learn the sikha inside. The pasuk says, Reishis Goyim Amalek. The head of Goyim, the beginning of Goyim is Amalek. Va'acharisa, the end of Amalek is Adei Ovid, have to be destroyed. This is a pasuk in Pashas Balak. Reishis Goyim Amalek, the beginning of Goyim is Amalek. Va'acharisa, and the end of Amalek is Adei Ovid, has to be destroyed. So how does Chassidus interpret this pasuk? Reishis Goyim Amalek, Va'acharisa Adei Ovid. So the basic explanation is this: Reishis Goyim Amalek means that the pnimius of all Goyim is Amalek. Technically, Goyim means people, okay? But there are good people and bad people. I'm not going to talk about people. I'm talking about the idea. Goyim means philosophies, ideologies that are from Klippa, okay? And there's a presumption that each nation has a different philosophy, a different ideology. And if they're a nation of Klippa, their ideology is a Klippa ideology. So there's many nations. For example, there are nations on this planet that define themselves as being very, very liberal, very kind. It's a good thing to be kind, right? But the fact of life is, and it says in Hilikas Forim, hamisachset im achazdonim mischased im achzorim, or hamischased im achzorim misachzed im achazdonim. If you're so nice that you're nice to bad people, then you're being cruel to good people. Unfortunately, this is a fact that we know. That when you have a certain midah, a certain emotion, you take it to an extreme, it's going to be abused. Or there are people who are very strict about following the law, very strict about the rules. You break the law, you go to jail. People who follow the law to the letter have cruelty. Right? It's a good thing. Law is a good thing. Legal systems are a good thing. Jurisprudence is a good thing. But if there's no lases stoko mishpat, if there's no lefnimi shura sadin, pshara, compromise, and other things like this, then following the law becomes cruel. That's klipa. Klipa is a good midah taken to an extreme, you understand? So every klipa is really good, but it's because it's klipa and it doesn't have balance, it goes to an extreme. Except Amalek. What's Amalek? I hate you. Why do you hate me? Because you exist. That's it. Kisra chutzpah b'lei taga. Amalek hates you and doesn't have a reason. He just doesn't like that you exist. Amalek is the klipa of chaos. He just doesn't like the fact that there's order. He doesn't like the fact that there is God and that there is order in the world, that there's goodness in the world. He can't take it. So most goyim, and again, I don't want to talk about people, I want to talk about ideas, are a midagan amok, are a positive attribute, a good thing. When it's taken to an extreme, it becomes klipa. And it needs what we call in our culture birur. It needs to be tempered, it needs to be balanced. Amalek is not that. Amalek is evil for no reason. So the pasuk says that Eish is goyim Amalek. Behind every goy is really Amalek. Behind every klipa, the beginning of every klipa is chutzpah. But you can't just come out and say, I hate you. So you say, listen, this is our political policy, these are our laws. You're breaking the law, so there's a punishment and something to this effect. I'll get to you in a minute. So Chassidus has a very interesting thing. Every goy has a birur. Every nation is corrected and uplifted. After Mashiach comes, they're going to be goyim. And according to the way the Rebbe learns, the Rambam, goyim are not going to be servants of Jews. No, they're going to be servants of God. Just like Jews are servants of God, goyim are servants of God. Amalek has to be wiped out. Why? Every goy has good and bad. You take out the good, the bad, what's left over is good. Amalek, because his whole entity, his whole identity is evil without an excuse, so he's the source of all klipa and he has to be destroyed. Acharisoy adei ivay, he has to be destroyed. So to use classic language, there are 70 nations that really begin with the 7 nations that lived in Canaan. After Mashiach comes, there will be 70 nations. Now, if you go to the United Nations, you'll find over 200. But Torah says that there are 70 races. After the Mabul, there are, I told you this before, in the book of Noach, Parshas Noach, in the book of Genesis, you have the names of the children of Shem, Cham, and Yefes. And it looks like simple genealogy. They just tell you the names of the children. If you'll count up, you'll see it's exactly 70 names. And it says in Sfar that those 70 names are not the names of people, they're the names of the 70 nations. And Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, in his Chumash, which is called the Living Torah, has a map. He follows Septuagint, he follows the Targum Shivim, where he shows you where these nations are on the map in the ancient world. Approximate, it's a lot of speculation, but nevertheless, he has this, he makes an effort to link the ancient 70 peoples, different places of the world. At that time, they were living much closer to Israel, then they would radiate outward. Al Pi Torah, there's 70 nations. So if in the United Nations there's 260 nations, that means every 3 nations is really one. And America, Bakal is not a Metzias. What's America? America's a cholent. It's a vinaigrette. There's a little of this and a little of that, a little of something else, and you have America. But Al Pi Torah, there are 70 nations. Now, when Mashiach comes, there'll be again 70 nations. And in my speculative, imaginary world, in the world of my fantasy, what I imagine is that right now all the different races are mixed up. After Mashiach comes, every body is going to go to his roots. Every goy is going to go to his roots. I know that sounds impossible, but in my fantasy, that's part of the order that Mashiach is going to bring to the world, that everybody is going to know which tribe he belongs to, which nation he belongs to, which piece of the earth belongs to that people, and they're going to go and live there. But okay, either that's true or that's false, it doesn't matter. The point is, this person's going to be goyim after Mashiach comes, with the exception of Amalek. Amalek's got to be wiped out. Because Amalek is bad. Amalek doesn't have bad, Amalek is bad. And that's the meaning of this pasuk. Reish is goyim Amalek. The root of every goy is Amalek. But all the other goyim, you take out the bad and the good is redeemed and uplifted. Amalek, because his whole metzias, his chutzpah, his end, acharisai, his end is adei eved, has to be wiped off the face of the earth, and so on and so forth. Okay, now what I just shared with you is it's a translation of a pasuk in Chumash, which is really classic to Hasidus. It's not such an unusual, it's a basic understanding of the difference between Amalek and the other nation, which is found in many Memorim and Hasidus. Your question, young lady.
I don't really understand like what Amalek is. It's is it like a spiritual thing that like possesses human beings? Or
That too, Amalek is a people, is a
it's
nation,
person? Oh,
is a group of people. Now, Amalek no longer exists. So it's not like you have to kill anybody. Amalek now is an idea.
was Hitler a model?
That's an interesting question. So I guess on some spiritual level, you could say that Hitler is Amalek, but the nation of Amalek, the physical group of people that the Torah calls Amalek, according to the Tanakh, according to the Chazal, were assimilated. At one point, all the nations got mixed up, and you no longer can identify what the root nations are. Okay, that's the technical answer to your question. So, as a practical matter, Amalek is an idea that exists in people's minds. Amalek is when I have a bad attitude without a reason, just bad, whether it's sad or it's angry or it's destructive, and there's no motivation. Okay, again, in the Hasidus that we learned, we translate Amalek in two ways. Amalek makes you cold to anything meaningful, and worse than anything else, Amalek's favorite thing is doubt, to make you unsure. Fair enough? Okay, anybody else that you had to say something? Go ahead.
With Amalek being the source of blame, and then like, okay, Amalek is the source, but then we know Hashem is the source of everything, and Hashem is everything. So how can Amalek be a different entity when Hashem is like, completely one?
I'm going to rephrase your question. First of all, it's a fact that Hashem created everything equal and opposite. Everything in Kedusha exists in Klipa. Hashem made the world to be a competition. And there are two forces, right? The force of good and the force of evil constantly interact, they constantly interface, and they grind against each other. They have to be mavad at each other, right? There's one exception to that rule. The exception to that rule is what we call in our culture Yechida. There's no opposition to Yechida, because Yechida means not I have a relationship with God. There's a piece of God inside of me. And if there's a piece of God inside of me, then there can't be any opposition to Yechida. But there's nefesh of Kedusha, there's nefesh of Klipa, there's ruach of Kedusha, there's ruach of Klipa, there's neshama of Kedusha, there's neshama of Klipa, there's even chaya of Kedusha and chaya of Klipa, okay? What you're asking me is that Amalek is the Klipa which is against Yechida. And you're saying, how could that exist? In other words, for Klipa to exist, it needs life. For it to have life, it has to have some kind of a face, some kind of presentable form. I'm not evil. I'm good in this way. The exception to that rule is Amalek. Amalek is a chutzpahnik. Amalek's whole definition is you walk into a room, you have something good to say, I'm going to disrupt you. I don't have a reason to disrupt you. It's not because I disagree. I don't want you to exist. That's why I say Amalek is the hyena of the human. They need chaos. They live on chaos. Not they live on chaos because they're going to get something back. They just cannot stand order. They walk into a room and everything is organized. They have to mess it up. They have this urge to create chaos for no reason. And again, the expression which is often used, chutzpah, disrespect. I mean, you understand that in the human interaction, people disagree. You and I can argue. We can have difference of opinion. We can express it in different ways, yeah? One of the hardest things to deal with is someone who laughs at you. Because when someone is making fun of you, they're not even respecting you enough to entertain what you're saying. It just doesn't matter what you're saying. They're just going to make fun of you. That's Amalek. So the question that you're really asking is this. Hashem created Kedusha, Hashem created Klipa. I get that. And I understand that if Klipa exists, it has to get life from Hashem. What is the life that Klipa gets from Hashem? The good in Klipa, which is what Klipa tries to present. Klipa doesn't come to long as I hate you. Klipa comes along, look, I'm such a pious man. I have laws. Now, those laws may mean I can cut your fingers off, but we have laws. You understand? There's an old Yiddish expression. It's based on a posuk, actually. The chazer weise and kosher fiesel. A pig, a swine, is treif chazer. It can't be more treif than a pig. But it has split hooves. So the pig sits in squalor. He sits in excrement. He sits in schmutz. But he sits on his behind. He look, I'm kosher. Every klipa has a kosher aspect. That's its face. That's what it shows. That's the life of the klipa. The life of the klipa is the good of the klipa. The good of the klipa is kedusha. But Amalek doesn't have any good. So your question is, how could such a thing exist altogether? So I created a whole new question, but I'm refining your question. It's not a question about klipa as a whole, because klipa as a whole is a mix of good and evil. And the life of the klipa is the good which sustains the evil, and the beater of the klipa, the correction of the klipa, the Mashiach of that klipa, is to get rid of the evil, and the good remains in its type, in its kind, in its midah. You understand? But Amalek has no good. So how does it exist? It's a fair question. And the right answer is it's very hard to explain, or I don't know without the gloves. I don't know. On a deeper level, you could really say that Amalek is a facade. Amalek's not a real thing. It looks like it's something. It has no reality. In Hasidus, there's such a concept that sometimes you face darkness, an enemy. When you defeat the enemy, you realize you're fighting with nothing. While you're fighting with the enemy seems so invincible. And once you defeat the enemy, he was nothing. So I'm not answering your question. I'm articulating it. I'm emphasizing it. And I'm supporting it. And I'm saying that there's a variety of different efforts at enlightening it. None of them are simple and easy. So basically, I'm saying, bravo for the question. And the reason that is so is because we know as a rule there is no klipa against Yechida. And Amalek seems to be the klipa which is against Yechida. And that's why Lasted Lavi has no Metzias. Fair enough? Okay. That's a long way to say I don't know. Leave it to a Jew. Now, what's our sikha about? It's fantastic. Let me get to the Nekudah. So when you learn Hasidus, you get the impression that the end of Amalek is destruction. There's nothing good about Amalek. Amalek is pure, unadulterated evil. There is nothing good about Amalek. And that's why Mashiach comes. Amalek is not allowed to exist. It has to be totally destroyed. You get it? Comes again to Lubavitcher Rebbe in his Maimorim. And in this Sikh, he says a very, very similar thing. He says, are you kidding? Amalek has many good attributes. First of all, if not for Amalek, would we have had Mesibus Nefesh? The Rebbe has Maimorim where he spins Amalek positive. Now, it's hard to know that when the Rebbe spins Amalek positive, is he saying that after Mashiach comes, there's still going to be Amalek. But in the Rebbe's Torah, the Rebbe finds redemptive qualities in Amalek. The standard, the presumed attitude towards Amalek is that Amalek is an evil that has nothing good about it. And that's why Mashiach comes, there's going to be nothing left of it. And in the Rebbe's Maimorim, and a number of them that I learned and taught, but I couldn't find this morning, you get the impression that the Rebbe is saying, well, Amalek's got some good stuff also. One of the examples that brings one of my Maimorim is, it says, Mibnei bonav shel Haman lomdu teira b'bnei Barak. Shmai and Naftalian, who were the leaders of generation, were Gadim, they were Gadei Tzedek, they were righteous converts, and they were descendants of Amalek. How could you say Amalek has no good? Some of the greatest Jews who ever lived, the greatest tzaddikim who ever lived, came from Amalek's seed. There's a Gemara in Masechta Gittin about a man whose name was Nivuzradun. Nivuzradun was called Rav Atabachim. He was called the executioner. That was his name. He was the executioner in the time of the first Beis HaMikdash. He killed so many people. He became disgusted with himself. He killed and he killed and he killed and he killed and he killed. And he kept on daring the Eibishter to stop him. And he killed and he killed and he killed. He became so sick and tired of killing that he ran away. And he became a Ger Tzedek. And his descendant is Rab Meir. Rab Meir, who is the teacher of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, who wrote the Mishnayos. And we assume that Rabbeinu HaKadosh wrote the Mishnayos, he's writing the opinion of his teacher. So from the worst klipa sometimes came the greatest tzaddikim. So how could you say Amalek is all bad? Shmai Naftalion came from Amalek, and so on and so forth. So the Rebbe always has a new way of looking at things, takes the existing paradigm that Achari said the Amalek is different than all other klipa, that there's nothing redemptive about him, and therefore has to be totally destroyed, and says, not so simple. There's something redemptive about Amalek. Now, how do you reconcile the Rebbe's philosophy or the Rebbe's revolution in this aspect to the tradition of Achari Sadi? There's ways. And if I can answer that question, I will be also able to answer yours, because it's a similar answer. But I simply want to point out what we're going to be doing now. We're going to be learning a sikh. It's going to be nice. The sikh is about comparing remembering Shabbos to remembering Amalek. You have a mitzvah to remember Shabbos. You have a mitzvah to remember Amalek. You have a mitzvah not to forget Shabbos. You have a mitzvah not to forget Amalek. And the Chazal are all saying, really? Shabbos and Amalek on the same plate? Shabbos and Amalek on the same plate? And the Rebbe's answer is going to be, because Amalek has some good stuff too, just like Shabbos. That's going to be the Rebbe's answer. When you learn the Sikha, you don't even appreciate how what the Rebbe is saying is a revolution. That's why I'm pointing it out. The standard interpretation of Amalek is at the end of Amalek is that Amalek is over. No more. The Rebbe, in a number of his teachings, and I think this Sikh is an edited version of it, seems to be saying that there is something done about Amalek as well. How do we reconcile what the Rebbe is saying with the tradition? We'll leave that for the parallel universe where they're learning the Sikh. Okay? Questions or comments? We're starting from inside. Yes, you have a copy? Who needs a copy? It's a new one. That's why you can't find it. Okay, what is your name? You're not on my list.
Me?
Sawisa.
Mushka.
Okay, so let's learn. We're going to start. We're going to take a break. We'll come back and we'll finish. Okay, that's my plan. Here we go. 1 second. What am I taking out of my bag of tricks, huh? My old man glasses.
Oh,
Have a light. Okay, I bought 4 of these. Spent $60 on magnifying glasses. I'm looking for the perfect one. Bottom line is I gotta make my eyes work. You ready, kid? You ready?
Yeah.
I'm reading it inside. B'siyum hasedre. At the end of our parsha, and our parsha doesn't mean b'shalach, it means pashas kiseitze. Of the psukim on the passages, Zohar asasher also lecho Amalek. Remember what Amalek did to you. Ba'derech, on the road, b'tzeis chamim Mitzrayim, when you left Egypt. It finishes loy tishkach. You have to remember, and you're not allowed to forget. Zogin razal. So it's written in Medrash and in Gemara. Zohar is bepeh and loy tishkach is belev. There's 2 parts to this mitzvah. Remembering means you have to orally speak. You have to say, there's a guy named Amalek and I hate him. Every day we say Laman, Tiska, every single day we say, right? Zohar, it's just Amalek. Of course, the date in the year where we focus exclusively on Amalek is Purim. The Yom Tov of Purim is the Yom Tov of erasing Amalek. And every day we have a Zechira, we mention Amalek. And you have to do it bedibo. You have to verbally mention, just 1 second. Okay, sorry, I'm moving you, people. Okay, you have to verbally mention Amalek. So we read, and then Lo Tishkach means belev, in your heart. You have to remember him with your mouth, and now let's forget it with your heart. And of course, what's the point? What's the point? What's the point of these words? The point of these words that Jewish law has a problem. Jewish law, halacha, has a problem. The problem with halacha is that everything Torah tells you has to be actionable. When the Eibush gives you a mitzvah, it means you have to do something and you have to understand what that mitzvah is, what that action is. How is remembering and not forgetting 2 different things? Remember to take your breakfast. Don't forget to take your breakfast. How many things did I just tell you?
Forgetting, like it's.
Don't forget. Remember and don't forget.
Remember, it's like just a process, Don't forget, it's like you need to remind you to not forget. So like the first one is like going like naturally. But the second one you need to do
Yeah, but when you're told, remember, when somebody else tells you, remember, that's also a pro-action.
yeah.
In Pshutei Shel Dvar, they're exactly the same thing. Remember to take your tzedakah. If you have a little kid in home and she's going out the door to go to the school, if you remember to take your tzedakah, don't forget to take your tzedakah, it's exactly the same thing. But parents and people are not so particular in our language. People do that all the time. Remember, don't forget, right? And of course, what does the kid answer? I'll remember, I won't forget, stop nudging. That's the way it goes. That's what parents do. But when the Torah does it, you have a problem. Because the Abish is not a nervous mother, you understand? When the Abish says remember and don't forget, it has to mean two things. Now, what two things are there in remembering Amalek and not forgetting Amalek? So the Chazal answer, remember means say it. You have to say, I remember what Amalek did and I'm still angry. And Leitishkach is don't forget which is in your heart. So not forgetting is what you're calling the natural phenomenon. Amalek hurt you, you don't forget about it. Zocher is a more precise. You have to actually do an act to remember, which is to speak. This is halacha's way of dealing with the redundancy in the Chumash. When the Torah tells you to do things twice, it has to have two different meanings. It means exactly the same thing. So we resolve it. Zocher means to say it, and Letichach means to not forget it in your heart. Here's the problem. Al derech zeh steht in Teres Kehanim. The same exact thing is written in Teres Kehanim, which is Vayikra, by Zocher. Es Yom HaShabbos L'Kadeshei. It's a mitzvah to remember Shabbos, L'Kadeshei, to make him holy. And by the way, Zocher Yom HaShabbos L'Kadeshei is also one of the Sheish Zechiras. It's 6 remembrances. And in Shulchan Aruch they bring from the Chazal or Machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, or Shammai and Hillel, how they would remember Shabbos every day. Shammai, every day of the week, he found a good piece of meat, he put it away for Shabbos. If he found later in the week a better piece of meat, so he would eat the first piece of meat and say the second meat for Shabbos. And he would say, Zul Shabbos. So he was always remembering Shabbos every single day of the week. Beis Hillel said, Baruch Hashem Yom Yom, that when Shabbos comes, Hashem is going to send me the best for Shabbos. And then you know what the Gemara says later? Hillel decided to follow Shammai, even though Hillel disagreed with Shammai. Shammai said, whatever you find, you have to put away for Shabbos till you find something better. Hillel said, when Shabbos comes, Hashem will send me the best. And then Hillel said, you know what, Shammai, I'm going like you. A whole week remember Shabbos. I had a great-grandfather whom I don't remember. I knew him, but I don't remember him. I was too young when he passed. His name was Zaidi Sofer, my grandmother's father, my mother's mother's father. He was Menachem Mendel Sofer, and they called him Menachem. He was born in Galicia, came to America as a teenager. He was a tough man, worked very, very hard his whole life. And he was a Gavaldik Yerei Shemayim. He was very righteous. He was pious. Here in America, when nobody was able to figure out how to be a Yid, he figured it out. He was a very tough man. He wasn't gentle, but that toughness made him into a Yid. And my mother said to me, my grandfather was a very tough man, but when he would sing, and he loved to sing, he was like a different person. And he had a mishagas. A whole week he ate Shabbos food. Tuesday he ate cholent, Wednesday he ate cholent, and whatever day of the week is, he would eat cholent. L'kuvat Shabbos Kodesh, L'kuvat Shabbos Kodesh. So my mother tells me that I was a little kid that was 2 years old, 3 years old, and then my Zaidi Sofer was eating, and I would see what he was eating. Say, Zaidi, what are you eating? I'm eating kigel. On Wednesday afternoon, he was eating kugel. So I say, can I have some kigel? He said, you can have some kigel, but you have to say L'kuvat Shabbos Kodesh. So I, as a little child, I don't even remember this, but it's someplace in my subconscious. If I wanted to eat the food that my grandfather was eating, I had to say L'kuvat Shabbos Kodesh on Sunday and on Tuesday and on Thursday and on Wednesday and on Monday and on Friday. It was a whole week with Shabbos. It's a mitzvah. Zocher es Yom HaShabbos means bepeh. Now, simply speaking, Zocher Yom HaShabbos bepeh means Kiddush. The mitzvahs I say of Kiddush is a biblical commandment. It's from the word Zocher Yom HaShabbos L'Kadesh. It's one of the 613 mitzvahs to make Kiddush. And you know what the halach of Kiddush is? Kacheyu b'knisaseu b'tiyasei. Havdalah is also Kiddush. You're Kaddish Shabbos in the beginning, and you're Makadosh Shabbos at the end. Friday night, you're Makadosh Shabbos. The girls are Makadosh Shabbos when they say Good Shabbos at the Lichben Shenidim, when you daven Ma'ariv. But their custom is that you do it al hakois. When you daven Ma'ariv, you say Ata Gidat at the end by Shvil Shmacha. That's Kiddush. Nevertheless, we do Kiddush a second time with a cup of wine, and we say Shekadishon of Mitzvah, and he gave us Mekadesh HaShabbos. Havdalah is Kiddush going out of Shabbos. So halachically, technically, Zocher means to say B'dibur Kiddush, and you do it on Shabbos. But to be sure, you're not supposed to do it only on Shabbos, you're supposed to do it every day. That's why every morning when we finish, we say Aleinu L'Shavech, then we say Sheish Zechiris. The last of the Sheish Zechiris is Zocher, Es Yom HaShabbos L'Kaddish. We say with our mouth Zechiris Shabbos. My great-grandfather was a Chassidish Yid, a Polish Yid, a Galatzana Yidl, and like all of his fellow Chassidim and his ancestors before him, a whole week they ate Shabbos food, and they were constantly saying L'Kuvet Shabbos Kodesh. It's a mitzvah. It's a hidden mitzvah. You understand? It's the mitzvah of Zocher. You have to verbally be Mekadesh Shabbos. And what's like Tishkach? You have to keep Shabbos in your heart. Let's read. Yeah? Second paragraph. Al derech v'shteitin teres keir says in Medrash. By Zocher as Yom Shabbos L'Kaddish, you're supposed to remember Shabbos to make it holy. Yochel b'libecha. Does that mean you have to remember Shabbos only in your heart, but you don't have to say it with your mouth? So the Teres Kerim says no. Kishu omer shamoyer. When it says in the second 10 commandments, Shomer, guard Shabbos, Hare Shmiras Leiv Amura, that includes guarding Hashem and your Shabbos in your heart. And the Teres Kerim therefore continues, Homo ani makayim zocher. When it says zocher, it means shati shoyne beficha. You have to say it with your mouth. Of course, you all know what this is about, right? You all know what this is about, right? What's it about? It's about the fact that the Aseres Adibos are repeated in the Chumash twice. You have Aseres Adibos in Pashas Yisrei, which is next week, right? B'Shalach Yisrei, next week's Chitas. And you have Aseres Adibos in the Shabbos after Tisha B'Av in Vos Chana. Remember? Right? Twice. Problem is, there are so many differences between the first Aseres. They're basically the same, but they're not exactly the same. There's a lot of different variations. And of course, the question becomes, which version is correct and which version isn't correct? How can you have two sets of, God said them only once, how can you have two sets of 10 commandments? So of course the answer is, at Har Sinai, Hashem said them only once, but there were two sets of luchas, remember? There were luchas that were broken, and the second set of luchas. So the presumption is that the 10 commandments in Pashas Yisrei were in the first luchas, and the 10 commandments in Vos Chanan were in the second luchas. I didn't make this up. One of the differences between the first luchas and the second luchas, which is very, very famous, is that in the first luchas it says Zocher es Yom HaShabbos L'Kaddish, and in the second luchas it says Shomer es Yom HaShabbos L'Kaddish. In short, Zocher is mitzvah saseh and Shomer is mitzvah sleisa. Zocher means remember, and Shomer means don't forget. So you have two mitzvahs of remembering Shabbos, Zocher es Yom HaShabbos and Shomer. So the Teres Kenim says that because it says Shomer, which means don't forget, so Zocher cannot mean remember in your heart, because that's included in not forgetting. It has to mean Kacheu Bepeh. You have to say Kiddush with your mouth. You understand? So just like by Amalek, you have Zocher and Leitishkach. And the Chazal learned Leitishkach means in your heart, don't forget Amalek. And Zocher means with your mouth, you have to remember Amalek. You have the same thing about Shabbos. Of course, the problem is the idea that Amalek and Shabbos have similar mitzvahs, and they're compared, they're correlated, they're connected, is very disturbing. Shabbos is one of the most holy things that we have, and Amalek is the most abhorrent, it's the most unholy thing that we know about. How do we put Shabbos and Amalek into a similar category? That's the question. Now, you know how this works, right? Only underline. Turn the page. 222. You see, I'm reading up. Dem tamchuma of dem pasuk. There's a medrash on this pasuk. Zacher is the asalacha Amalek. The Tanchuma asks, and I want you to know, I actually opened up the Tanchuma and looked inside. I can't in my yeshiva where I worked, it's very hard to find Slonim. So I went to HebrewBooks.com. I downloaded the Tanchuma. I opened it up. I found the Tanchuma and I read it inside, because the Tanchuma is not complete here. It only brings the beginning of it. Kan ksiv Zacher. By Amalek it says Zacher. You should remember, and it also says don't forget. Ubi Shabbos ksiv Zacher, and by Shabbos it says remember not to forget. Shnei Shavim Betmiyah, can they both be considered the same? Omar Shleimi, so Shleima Melech explains that Shabbos is when your plate is full. You're remembering and not forgetting Shabbos, but when your plate is full. And Amalek with your plate is empty. Your Shabbos, in other words, in both cases, you're doing the same thing. You're remembering and not forgetting. But on Shabbos, the remembering and not forgetting is because Shabbos is such a wonderful thing. On Amalek, you're remembering and not forgetting because it's such a terrible thing. So even though they share a similarity in the sense that both of them require Zocher, and both of them require Al Tishkach, or Shomer, Lei Tishkach, or Shomer, they're very, very different. Our Sicha is going to insist that they have some similarity, even though the Tanchuma says, well, yeah, here it says Zocher, here it says Zocher, here it says Al Tishkach, here it says Al Tishkach, but they're very different. The Rebbe says that's not enough. There's got to be a similarity. And I already told you what the code is going to be. The code is going to be that the Rebbe is going to find something redemptive about Amalek, even though it says in the Pasuk, Achari said the Yevit. Next paragraph. In Pirkei Rabbi Lezer, which is another medrash, it's written, when Moshe Rabbeinu said, Zocher, remember what Amalek did to you, but on the road which says, left Egypt. Amru lo Yisrael, the Jewish people said to Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe Rabbeinu, who speaks Hebrew? Moshe Rabbeinu, Taich. Translate, please. Moshe Rabbeinu, somebody help me, please. Moshe, our teacher. Rebbe Moshe, teacher Moshe Rabbeinu. Kosav Academia, Zocher Esneshal Amalek. One pasuk says, remember what Amalek did. Because of Academia, another pasuk says, Zocher Esem Shabbos and Kaddish, remember Shabbos and make it holy. Heich Yuskayim Shneim. How can they both be satisfied? Zez Zocher v'Zez Zocher. This is a memory and this is a memory. Now, what's the pasuk of the reading of Lezer? What's the most basic reading of the Pirkei Rabbi Lezer? Girls, please use your minds. What's the simplest reading of the words of the Pirkei Rabbi Lezer? Huh? I can't think about two things at once. You tell me to remember Aleph, I remember Aleph. You'll tell me to remember Beis, I remember Beis. I can't remember both. I can take turns, but I can't remember both at the same time. How am I supposed to remember Shabbos and Amalek in the same breath? That's the simple meaning of what the Pirkei Rabbi Lezer is saying. Of course, the deeper meaning is, why would I think about something so positive and something so terribly despicable and negative in the same thought? And since I have a constant at every minute chiyuv to remember Shabbos and every minute chiyuv to remember Amalek, that's a bad vinaigrette. It's, to make a vinaigrette, you know what vinaigrette is? It's you know what vinaigrette is. It's an Eastern European salad. It has whatever you put in, yeah? If you put in rotten pickles, it doesn't just ruin the pickles, it ruins the whole vinaigrette. The whole thing is no good. Why would you remember Shabbos and Amalek? They're conflicted. They don't work together. That's the kasha. Now, the teretz of the Mechilta is on top of 223. I didn't underline it. I'm going to ask you to do this. I never do this. The very first words on page 223. You see, Moshe Rabbeinu, Amalek Moshe Rabbeinu's answer is, you cannot compare a cup of konditun, which is a good concoction, a good drink, to a cup of chaymet. Chaymet means vinegar. Even though that costs, but that costs. This is a cup and this is a cup. Nevertheless, zochar, lishmed, ulakadosh Shabbos. You're remembering to guard and to halafai Shabbos. Shenem zochar say Shabbos lakadosh. You're remembering it for the sake of holiness. V'zeh zocher, and Amalek you're remembering lo'inish. Lo'inish means to punish Amalek. Moshe says, you're right. They're very, very different. But it's like having two cups, a cup of a delicious wine or concoction called kunditun, and a cup of something very, very despicable, which is called vinegar. So you got to remember both cups, but you're remembering them for very, very different reasons. That's Moshe Rabbeinu's answer, which is quite similar to what the Tanchuma that the Rebbe doesn't bring the end of. That Shlomo HaMelech says, this is on a full cup, a full dish, full kedera. This is an empty kedera. The way the Medrash describes it is you eat a meal, the plate is clean, you take a piece of bread and you wipe whatever's left in the plate, so the plate is clean. Then you have a mullik. As long as there's something on the plate, that's still a Shabbos. So Moshe Rabbeinu in the Pirkei Rabbi Lezer, like Shlomo HaMelech in the Tanchuma, are saying, yeah, you have to remember this and remember this, but they're very, very, very different. But for the Rebbe, that's not going to work. He's not happy with that. Bottom line is we're comparing them. You can contrast them. You can tell me how different they are. Bottom line is you're remembering Shabbos. You're remembering Amalek. You have a mitzvah to remember and not forget Shabbos. You have a mitzvah to remember not to forget Amalek. It just seems odd that this is how the Torah would arrange our lives, that we should have these two very opposite things in our memory all the time. You with me? So the Rebbe continues. The bir bazeh. The explanation is this. What the Rebbe is saying now is important. This is a very Hasidic gedank. In mitzvahs bechlal, there are drei sugim. When you talk about mitzvahs, there's three types of mitzvahs. Mitzvahs sheva ma'aseh, mitzvahs that are actionable, that we do, which is most mitzvahs. Tefillin, mezuzah, challah, and on. And there's mitzvahs sheba dibur, mitzvahs that we do in speech. What's an example of mitzvah which is in speech? Saying Shema, davening, learning Torah, saying Brechas Hamazon, benching, saying Hallel, and other brachas, right? And then you have mitzvahs sheba machshav, mitzvahs are in thought. What mitzvahs are in thought? To believe in God, to understand God, to understand His unity. These are mitzvahs which are in thought. Now, technically, there are 613 mitzvahs. Some are actionable, some are maaseh, some are spoken, some are dibur, and some are thought, machshava. But the Rebbe argues that all 613 mitzvahs must be done on all three levels of machshava, dibur, and maaseh. And this idea, I think, is originally purported in the Tanya in a number of places. When the shleimus in kiyum mitzvahs is, when is a Jew doing mitzvahs completely? And I'm reading it inside. There's oich mitzvahs sheba maaseh, even actionable mitzvahs. Zon zayin mit kavanas machshavas other require also speech and thought and intent. On the other hand, oich mitzvahs sheba dibur b'machshava, mitzvahs which by themselves are only speech and thought. Zon poyel zayin of dimension should affect the person. Bees in maaseh bepel to action. So now there's some mitzvahs that you can only think or only feel. But the mitzvah take you over so much that your actions are different. Like a person has a munah, right? I'll tell you this in chapter 33. If your munah is wholesome, you'll automatically do mitzvahs. As if there's only one mitzvah. The amunah takes over your actions because of the quality of the amunah. So each mitzvah, the way Chassidus explains it, and it could be from Kisvei Arizal, but it's in Tanya in a number of places, all taryag mitzvahs, you have to be makayim, b'machshava, dibur, maaseh, on all three levels. The alderech, for example, amunah shabalev, believing Hashem in your heart. V'asdaf peil zayin kiyum, that needs to affect the action of kol mitzvah, the mitzvahs. Kamam Chazal, the Gemara says, and it's mentioned in Tanya Perik Lamed Gimel. Bo Chabakuk ve'amidan al achas. Chabakuk came along and said all 613 mitzvahs are really one mitzvah. Shenemer, as the pasuk says, v'tzadik be'emunasa yichid, the righteous lives because of his emunah. So emunah is a mitzvah in machshava. It's a spiritual mitzvah, but it's a mitzvah that has a huge effect on action. Okay. Next, underline, please. On the Rebbe stellt sich die Shaila. The question, therefore, is: Wie kann sein as Zikaron? Zusammen. How can a person use in his imagination to remember and then to speak and then to do? Von Azelchat say in Yom Hachim, two contradictory things like this: the Shabbos and Amalek. If when I'm remembering Shabbos, it's not just a thought; it's also a speech and also an action. If I'm remembering Amalek, it's not just a thought; it's also a speech, also an action. How can those two things fill my brain at the same time? That's the question. Okay? And if you're good, we will break. Try to come back in 5 minutes, and we're going to learn the rest of the Sikh. Okay? And again, I'm telling you up front, what's the Rebbe going to do? He's going to argue that there's something positive about Amalek, even though the standard idea in Hasidus is Acharisei Adei Oived. The Rebbe is going to give us a different point of view. Okay? Oh yeah, a cup of coffee would be nice, please. Oh, just milk and sugar, regular coffee. Please. How we doing?